The hidden trident. The dark history behind the symbol of psychology. What if what you were taught to fear was, in fact, the key to understanding your own mind? It may sound strange, even provocative, but history shows that the most rejected symbols are often the most revealing. Not because they are dangerous, but because they point to something many people prefer not to face: the inner power that emerges when someone truly begins to understand themselves. From an early age, we are taught to distrust images that stir instincts, desires, and internal conflicts, and that did not happen by accident. What is curious is that while certain symbols were pushed into the realm of fear, they continued to work silently within the human psyche. Without realizing it, people repeat emotional patterns, feel guilt without knowing why, and fight internal battles that seem to have no clear origin. Modern psychology merely assigns scientific names to processes that had already been symbolically represented for thousands of years. The paradox is uncomfortable. What was labeled a threat may be exactly the missing map. Perhaps this content feels unsettling, and that is a good sign. Because whenever an idea disturbs, it touches something real. This is not about believing in something new, but about seeing what has always been there, hidden in plain sight. If symbols survive demonization, it is because they carry truths that are difficult to ignore. The question is simple, yet powerful. What changes when you stop running and start understanding? From sacred symbol to demonized symbol. There is a curious detail about ancient symbols that almost no one mentions. They were never created to decorate temples or illustrate beautiful stories. They were born to teach something that could not be spoken out loud. They were silent maps of the human mind, passed down from generation to generation like a secret too dangerous to be forgotten. And perhaps that is why, at some point in history, certain symbols began to disturb. When something points inward, it awakens instinct, autonomy, and consciousness. And that, let's be honest, has always been seen as a threat. In the beginning, no one spoke of fear or sin. People spoke of understanding internal forces, emotional cycles, and difficult decisions. A well-understood symbol helped someone deal with impulses, choices, and inner conflicts long before any psychology manual existed. It was as if the person had access to a language that explained what they felt, even before they could name it. The problem began when these images started to liberate more than they guided. When a symbol teaches someone to think for themselves, it stops being neutral and becomes dangerous to those who control narratives. That was when the most efficient shift occurred, and almost no one noticed. The symbols were not erased or destroyed. The story told about them was simply changed. What once guided began to frighten. What once connected became taboo. Slowly, an unease emerged that was hard to explain, a diffuse fear that crossed generations. And it is precisely this unexplained discomfort that opens the next inevitable question. If this symbol was powerful enough to need distortion, what exactly did it reveal about the human mind? The trident as an ancestral archetype. Long before being associated with fear, punishment, or chaos, the trident carried a very different meaning, and perhaps that is exactly why it was so distorted. It did not appear as a weapon, but as a symbol of internal mastery, balance, and the integration of forces that at first seemed opposed. 3 points supported by a single axis were not an aesthetic detail, they were a clear message: nothing functions in isolation. Just as mind, body, and emotion must communicate, the trident taught that true power is born from harmony, not repression. In ancient cultures, this symbol was linked to the invisible, to what operates beneath the surface. Deities associated with the trident did not rule only storms or turbulent oceans, but mainly the silent currents that sustain everything unseen. Poseidon, for example, did not represent mere destruction, but control of internal and external chaos. It is similar to when someone begins to observe repetitive emotional patterns. At first it is frightening, but soon it becomes clear that weakness does not live there, untapped strength does. And this is exactly where the symbol begins to disturb. Because it reminds us that chaos can be understood, impulses can be integrated, and what seems dangerous may simply be unfamiliar. Gradually, the trident stopped pointing to balance and came to symbolize threat, punishment, and disorder. The form remained, but the meaning was inverted. And when an archetype undergoes this kind of repression, it does not disappear. It moves inward, resurfacing as inner conflict, diffuse fear, and emotional discomfort, precisely the terrain where psychology enters the scene. Psychology, the shadow, and what was repressed. Everything that could not be freely expressed eventually found shelter in a silent place within the mind. Emotions, desires, impulses, and even talents were pushed backstage in the psyche, not because they were dangerous, but because they were unwelcome. Modern psychology merely named something ancient symbols already understood well. It is like storing a box at the back of a closet. While it remains closed, it seems harmless, until the day someone bumps into it and everything spills out at once. The so-called shadow is not the evil side, as many imagine. It is the collection of everything that had to be hidden so a person could be accepted, loved, or simply survive socially. Someone who learned that anger was wrong, for example, often developed the habit of smiling while tension accumulated inside. Someone taught not to question became skilled at obedience, even when something screamed internally. Observing exaggerated reactions in daily life is enough. They almost always reveal something unresolved in the shadow. When ancient symbols were demonized, the same process occurred within people. What once represented internal power began to be seen as internal threat. The result is a silent conflict between who someone truly is and who they learned they should be. The more the shadow is ignored, the more it manifests indirectly, through anxiety, guilt, and self-sabotage. And it is precisely at this point that certain symbolic figures begin to gain face, name, and personality in cultural narratives, opening the path to the most misunderstood metaphor of all. The devil as a psychological metaphor. Few people realize it, but the figure of the devil was never just about an external enemy of humanity. From the beginning, it functioned as a symbolic representation of internal conflicts that humans refused to face. Horns, tail, and trident did not emerge by chance. They all point to instincts, desires, and impulses that were labeled dangerous over time. Whenever someone feels guilt for thinking differently, desiring the forbidden, or questioning imposed rules, this metaphor appears, not as a threat, but as an uncomfortable mirror. In practice, this image helped shift responsibility. Instead of dealing with difficult emotions, an external figure was created to carry the blame. It is easier to say, "I was tempted," than to admit, "I wanted it." This mechanism appears constantly in daily life. People who sabotage opportunities and claim the universe conspires, or those who repress desires and later explode without understanding why. The metaphor organizes fear, but it also blocks psychological maturity when interpreted literally. The problem was never the image itself, but how it was read. Symbols exist to teach, not to be taken at face value. When they lose their transformative function. Seen as a metaphor, this figure speaks of limits, conscious choices, and impulse integration. Ignoring this keeps a person trapped in an endless inner war. And it is precisely here that the most curious turn in history occurs. The most demonized symbol of all reappears, silently, at the center of modern psychology, not as a villain, but as a foundation. The most feared symbols in human history have something in common. And the question almost no one dares to ask is this: is it a diabolical lineage, or simply what you were taught to believe? Whenever a symbol pointed toward autonomy, instinct, or inner power, it needed to be given a dark origin. Not because it was evil, but because it worked. The narrative was simple. If you fear the symbol, you will never try to understand it. And those who do not understand, obey. In the next video, this story is turned inside out. We will examine the most demonized symbols in human history and expose a pattern that spans centuries. And when you finally see it, you may realize that fear was never in the symbol, but in the consciousness it awakens.